beginning the topic all over again, but mainly we would begin to do revision of the topic. Kind of for those who have already started the topic and have gone deep into it, they are going to get this as an opportunity to go through the topic once more. Now, as I begin the topic, I want us to take note of the fact that by now, each one of us needs to have known that we have a total of 17 topics in our syllabus from Form 1 up to Form 4. And that is from introduction, we have 5 topics in Form 1. That is introduction to biology. The second topic is classification 1. The third topic is the cell. There is cell physiology, and the last topic in Form 1 is nutrition. Now, I keep on saying that even as we move to each of these topics, even as we begin each topic, these topics are not arranged the way they are arranged in the entire syllabus from Form 1 up to Form 4 is actually they tell a story about the living organism. Because as we've come in, we are told biology is the study of living organisms or the study of living things. So the topics as they are arranged from Form 1 up to the last topic, that is support and movement, they are all about a story of a living organism. And the story is simple, and by now as a candidate, you should be able to tell that story because you now have understood fully the organism and how it is structured by the creator himself. Now, having been told that biology is the study of living things, you realize you divert a little to go and look at how a living thing is structured. But before you understand it, you realize living things are many in the universe. Many there are many on Earth, and so we need to understand the basic principles of classification in Chapter 2 of Form 1. That is uh, classification 1. Now, in chapter 3, the topic is called the cell, but essentially, when you look at the cell, that topic is about 3 or 4, at most 5 things. One, it looks as how a living organism is organized, right? From the smallest unit, which is the organelle, then you realize several organelles form a cell, then several cells form a tissue. You realize the organisms that exist as cells, these are unicellular organisms like the amoeba and the paramecium and such. But majority of the organisms that we have on Earth are multicellular, and we talk about multicellular organisms, which are made up of several cells, and the one cell, the several cells form a tissue, then tissues form organs. We have you need to also understand examples of tissues, like we discussed the blood as an example of tissue in Form 1. Then a tissue is a group of cells made up of similar cells that perform a specific function. And then several tissues form an organ, organs form an organic system. So essentially the topic, the cell, is meant to show you how living organisms are structured in order to enable them perform life supporting processes. So from the organelle to the cell to the tissue, organ system, and then an organism. Then in the same topic, you look at specialized cells. Yes, we've seen how a cell looks under a microscope, but we have certain cells that have certain modifications so that they can perform specific functions. An example is the sperm cell, a blood cell. They have specific adaptations. A root hair cell, specific adaptations that enable them to perform specific functions. And then that is what we call cell specialization. Then you have to look at a few of tissues. You have to also look at a few of tissues in plants and a few of tissues in animals. Then from there, you look at organs, and we know, like in animals, we know what organs are, and those organs form systems like the reproductive system, the circulatory system, and we've had a look at a number of those systems in our syllabus from Form 1 up to Form 4. So in topic 3, which is the cell physiology, you need to see the relevance of the topic. In other words, for example, we've said one of the organelles that we've looked at is the mitochondrion, whose role is to synthesize energy. It's the site for energy synthesis in a cell or in an organism. Now, for the mitochondrion to perform its function of energy synthesis, substances must get into the cell and others must come out. And so we are bringing in topic 3, which is cell physiology, to enable us understand how materials, how substances get to move into the body of a cell, and some get to move out so that the cell can perform its life supporting process. We've seen quite a number of processes that are performed in the topic, the cell: protein synthesis, photosynthesis, respiration, excretion. All these are life supporting processes that a cell requires, so that as the cell becomes the functional and structural unit of any living organism, then this living organism now can survive. This living organism can live. And that is why we are talking about this topic, cell physiology, processes that allow substances to move into and out of the cell. And we are only discussing 3 physiological processes at that stage in form 1. And that is the first one, diffusion; the second one, osmosis; the third one is active transport. Now, it is essential that you understand these processes and what they entail and how relevant they are in the life of a living organism. Now, after understanding these physiological processes, now we go to the first characteristic of living organism, and this is again something that we do under introduction, that is meant to enable us understand or distinguish a living organism from a non-living organism. Those 8 characteristics, that is the nutrition, gases exchange, respiration, excretion. We have reproduction, growth and development, and then the last 2 that we deal with in Form 4, that is irritability and support and movement. So I keep on reminding us that the syllabus for biology from Form 1 up to Form 4 is about those 8 things, those 8 characteristics of living. So in Form 1, the first topic, that is the last topic in Form 1, we discuss the first characteristic of living organism, which is nutrition. Organisms, a process through which organisms acquire or obtain and utilize nutrients in their bodies. Now, after we have taken in food, for example, the food becomes digested, there is ingestion, there is digestion, then the food becomes absorbed into the body. After absorption, now before we move to the second characteristic, which is gaseous exchange, we realize these nutrients that have been digested, they have been absorbed into the body of living organisms, they require to first get distributed from the point of entry into the body of an organism. That is after absorption. Absorption, for example, if we are talking about plants, the point of entry into the body of a plant is at the root. That is through the root air. So the nutrients, the mineral salts have been absorbed. Before they can be utilized, before they can be used in the body, they require to be transported. And that is how the first topic in Form 2, which is transport, comes in. That topic has been specifically positioned there to enable us understand the relationship between the food that we've ingested, the food that has been absorbed, and that before it can perform, for example, the process of energy synthesis in the mitochondrion, the food requires to be transported. And that is the reason why, for example, in animals, we talk about 3 things under transport. The heart, which is the pump that creates the pressure or the force with which the nutrients are going to be circulated. Then we talk about the transport medium, that is blood, for example, in mammals. Then we talk about the channels, that is the blood vessels through which the transport medium carries the nutrients from various parts of the body. Equally in plants, we have to understand the transport system. We talk about the vascular transport system, comprising of the xylem vessels and the phloem, which is meant to transport the absorbed mineral salts from the point of entry into the plant to the rest of the body of the plant for various functions such as photosynthesis and even respiration. So we want to assume, for example, the glucose molecule that has been absorbed into the bloodstream, has been transported from the alimentary canal, specifically the phyllars, and it is now moving, for example, to the tricep muscles or to the thigh muscles in the leg. And after it gets to the thigh muscles that are having one of the characteristics that they have a huge number of mitochondria or have numerous mitochondria so that they can generate energy to enable us move or walk, for example. This glucose molecule has been transported. You have to understand the pathway from, for example, or at the point of absorption through the hepatic portal vein into the liver, from the liver to the heart, for example, through the hepatic vein, from the heart it moves through the right ventricle, right auricle, left ventricle, or to the lungs, oxygenation. You have to understand that pathway so that the moment now it gets from the aorta of the heart, it will get to the dorsal aorta.
Okay.
The dorsal aorta will branch into the femoral artery. The femoral artery into arterioles into capillaries, and at the capillary level, this glucose would now be exchanged into the blood. Into the tissues, so that it would now get into the mitochondrion for purposes of energy synthesis. So the point I'm putting across is we need to understand this relationship between the topics, because it is that relationship that you realize that is mostly examined in many of the questions that we encounter in biology, both in paper 1 and paper 2, even in paper 3. So after we have seen uh, transport, then we are saying these glucose molecules has arrived in the thigh muscles, in the mitochondrion found in the thigh muscles. We realize for it to generate energy, gases must move into and out of the body of the organism. And then we bring in characteristic number 2, that is gaseous exchange. Now, it is through diffusion that oxygen would get from the atmosphere into the respiratory system, for example, of human beings from through the nostrils, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, all the way into the alveolus. Then from the alveolus, the oxygen will diffuse across the alveolar wall into the mitochondrion. Now, once the oxygen gets into the mitochondrion, then it is used to oxidize the glucose molecules, which we refer to as chemical breakdown of food substances. That process is now what we're calling respiration. Respiration is characteristic number 3 of living organisms. Once the oxygen has oxidized the glucose molecule, then we are forming energy as one of the products. Then the second product is a waste product we call carbon dioxide. Now, this carbon dioxide has been formed as a result of oxidation of the glucose molecule to generate energy. In other words, one of the life supporting process that I said is respiration. It is important that each living organism carries out respiration for purposes of energy synthesis, for it to enable the organism to perform many functions that we carry out, like movement. We require energy to move. We require energy to carry out excretion. We require energy for growth and all those processes. Now, once this waste product, carbon dioxide, has been generated, it requires to be eliminated from the body. And that is the last topic in Form 2, called excretion and homeostasis. That the waste product must first be isolated or separated. Then after they have been separated, they then must be eliminated from the body, a process we refer to as excretion. Now, after that, we have left Form 2. We have left Form 2, going to Form 3. And remember in form 1, we did uh, we did that is introduction to classification, the basic principles called classification 1. Now, this first topic in Form 3, we realized in Form 1 we were just laying the foundation. After having agreed that the organisms that we encounter on Earth are so many, we just needed to understand the basic principles such as binomial nomenclature, the taxonomic units, reasons for classification, one of which we said for easy study of these organisms. So in Form 3, essentially the first topic, which is classification 1, classification 2, we are now doing the real classification of living organisms. Into the 7 taxonomic units, we agree we have, for example, the kingdom. Then we look at the 5 kingdoms, beginning from the most primitive, which is Monera, Kingdom Monera, and these are mainly bacteria. Then the second most primitive kingdom becomes Protocitista, comprising of algae and protozoa. Then the third most primitive is fungi. Then we come to the fourth kingdom, which is plantae, and lastly we talk about animalia. Now we are using the features of living organisms, both observable and physiological, some phylogenetic, those that are related with the evolution or genetics, so that we can classify these organisms. And so we don't discuss much of these details in, let's say, Kingdom Monera. In Monera, we only need to look at the characteristics of bacteria and then the importance of bacteria, examples of bacteria, and the structure of bacteria. Same thing to Kingdom Protocitista. We have to look at a few examples, those that are plant-like uh, protists. Examples, we talk about Spirogyra, algae, etc. And then we have those that are animal-like, like the Paramecium, the amoeba, and such. And then when we come to fungi, we also don't go to those details in terms of taxonomic classification, but we look at examples of fungi, characteristics of fungi, and the biological significance of fungi in on Earth. Now, when it comes to the fourth kingdom, which is plantae, again, we don't go into details. We talk about three divisions, beginning from the most primitive division called, we talk about bryophyta, then followed by deltophyta, followed by the most advanced of those divisions is spermatophyta. Bryophyta, these are only 2 examples, the liverwort and the moss. Deltophyta, we discuss the ferns only. Then when it comes to spermatophyta, we go a bit into details because this division contains a huge number of organisms. But even at our level, we don't go into details. We only discuss, again, 2 subdivisions under division spermatophyta. And this is the division gymnospermophyta, comprising of those plants that have xerophytic characteristics, those plants that are found in desert or dry environments. And under Gymnospermophyta, we discuss 3 classes because we are moving from division Spermatophyta, subdivision Gymnospermophyta, and then under it we discuss 3 classes. That is the class Coniferales, class Ginkgoales, and then the class Cycadales. The second subdivision under that particular division is the subdivision Angiospermophyta. Angiospermophyta are the common plants that we classify into 2 main classes. That is the class Monocotyledonae and the class Dicotyledonae. And I keep on saying you will encounter these questions in practicals, for example. If you're given any plant material, and that plant material is not a moss or it's not a fan, and you are asked the division should obviously be spermatophyta. If that plant material you have been given as xerophytic characteristics, here I'm referring to, for example, folded leaves or a thick wax cuticle or needle-like leaves or such, and then if you ask the subdivision becomes gymnospermophyta. And then under Gymnospermophyta, you have 3 classes. That is, Coniferales, Cycadales, and Ginkgoales. Now, if that plant material is anything else other than what we've described, then it can only belong to the subdivision Angiospermaphyta. Angiospermaphyta comprises of only two classes, and that is class Monocotyledonare and the class Dicotyledonare. And that does it for the kingdom Plantae. Then Animalia, again, we discussed two phyla, and that is the phylum Arthropoda and the phylum Chordata. You guys are lucky. I keep on saying that the syllabus have been trimmed back, because I remember while in high school, we were discussing a total of 9 phyla, but you're only doing 2. That is the phylum Arthropoda and phylum Chordata. So essentially, I'm saying we do classification in Form 3, that topic called classification 2. Essentially, we do the real classification of the organisms. Now, after classifying the organisms, we are saying we realize these organisms are not just found in an environment that is a vacuum in nature. They are found in an environment. They are not found in a vacuum. So what we do, we deviate a bit to now understand the environment in which these organisms are found, the habitat. The living organism is not found in a vacuum. It is found in a habitat. It's found in an environment. And so in topic 2 of Form 3, we are doing ecology so that we can understand the environment within which the organism is found. You remember, we look at the abiotic factors, and the biotic interrelationship between these organisms. There is rainfall, there is temperature, there is humidity, there is water, there is soil. How do these factors affect the distribution of living organisms? And that is our main target in the second topic in Form 3, that is ecology. Ecology is meant to enable us understand the environment in which this living organism is found. So you look at the abiotic factors, those factors that are not having life in them: soil, water, temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, etc. Then we look at the biotic factors: parasites, pathogens, other predators, etc. All those, and what are their effects? How do they influence distribution of other living organisms in the ecosystem? Then after that, we also want to look at the environment in terms of populations. Organisms are found, they are having a number of populations. We look at population estimation methods, and we talk about capture recapture. You know them, those sampling methods. Then from there, we move to which topic? Okay, after populations, you look at population estimation methods and all those. I'm trying to say in topic 2 of Form 3 work, we do ecology, and we want to understand the ecology of the organism in as far as the environment where this organism is found is concerned. After understanding the ecology, now we are saying this organism from 1, it has eaten. After eating, it has been able to carry out gases exchange. It has energy through respiration. It is able to carry out gases, excretion. The organism in Form 3 has been classified. The organism has a home. In Chapter 3 of Form 3 work, the organism has to now carry out reproduction. After reproduction, you have to look for mate, for example. After getting the mate, after getting the mate, you will now have to reproduce. After reproducing, you look at all those processes, adaptations of various reproductive organs or structures to their function. I think that we've done in detail, both in plants and animals. Remember, all this we do both in plants and animals. And then after that, we now say the young one that has been reproduced has to grow. And then that is the last topic in Form 3, that is growth and development. After the organism grows, we move to Form 4. Form 4, the first topic we are doing is genetics. Our question is, I keep on saying this, members of 3M, 4M, I think you must have listened to this severally. I say, you've married a wife, a very beautiful one, for example, and then after getting that beautiful wife, you've given rise to uh, a young one. Now, you as an individual have a normal skin color. Your wife is also having a normal skin color, but the two of you have produced a child who's an albino, for example. Now, you begin questioning what might have happened, and or you do a first attempt, unapata you've gotten a daughter. The second attempt unapata ni msichana tena, watatu unapata tena ni msichana, ukienda wa nne ni msichana, and then jamaa unaanza kuleta taswisi kwamba, oh, I think I need to marry again. You know, these things used to happen before people understood anything about genetics. So this topic, genetics, we are essentially bringing it there to make you understand that really it is possible that you may have a normal skin color, and that your wife could also be having a normal skin color, but the two of you are capable of producing an albino child. That is in case the two of you are heterozygous for that particular trait. And that is also, you meant to understand that you as a man, you're not supposed to begin making noise to your wife that she has not been able to give you a son, because you know she is not capable. The one who needs to do a donation of the chromosome Y and to the sperm that will fuse with the ovum is you, so that we can get a boy, because we know a boy has XY while the female has XX. So it means the ovum will always be the same. But you, who is donating the sperm, you should be the one now struggling to ensure that if you want a boy, you are to release that sperm that contains the the Y chromosome, so that it can fuse with the ovum that contains X for us to obtain a son. So really, the topic is meant to enable you to understand the variations that we see both in plants and animals, and how these variations are inherited, are transmitted from one generation to the next. And then while you are at your home, you have children, you have a wife, maybe you're eating well, you have a good house, and all those. At that time, you are becoming a bit old, and you are now beginning to ask a number of questions. I seem to have obtained all this in life. Now, where am I headed? Kwanza hii maisha ilianza aje? What is the origin of life? Where am I going after here? And then now we are bringing the topic number 2 in Form 4 work, which is evolution, to enable you understand that this life must have originated somewhere. The origin of life, and how life has evolved over time. You remember the theories of evolution, the chemical evolution theory. We talk about the theory of special creation. There are these fellows who are saying there was this supreme being who brought life into being. That is who created life. And then the scientists would say, the scientists like Charles Darwin would say life must have originated from chemicals that uh, fused together many years ago when the environmental temperatures were very high. And you remember those theories that we discussed under evolution. Meanwhile, we are saying that young one which was produced in the last topic in Form 4, in Form 3, growth and development, is trying to grow. And as it's growing, it's exploring the environment. Anasonga hapa kidogo, anadungwa na miba. Utasikia akipiga makelele, meaning he is detecting, at the same time responding to changes in the environment. And that is characteristic number 7 of living organisms. That is sensitivity, or what we call irritability, the ability to detect and then respond to changes in the environment. So this young one is trying to explore the environment. Anakula including anything. Ukimwekea ndimu anajua kumbe hii ni kali. So ukimwekea next kama anaiangalia atakataa. That is meaning he is able to detect and also responding appropriately. And as this young one is doing this, utapata as the days are running, anasupport kwa viti, anasimamia, anapata vitu, then on the table supporting himself. Once he's been able to support himself or herself, then the last characteristic is movement in living organisms, and that is the broader picture that a boy or a candidate in KC school needs to get before you even begin to understand the basics. So the 17 topics are that closely related so that they can tell you the story of a living organism. And I think, like I've said, the story of a living organism is about those 8 characteristics of living organisms. Members of 4M will tell you that is the story of Mr. Nigger, where you have N for nutrition, M for movement, R for respiration, N for nutrition, I for irritability, G for gases exchange, another G for growth and development, E for excretion, and then lastly, reproduction. So kindly, as you do your revision, we are coming to the end of the entire topic and the entire syllabus. Ensure you are able to see those topics with that kind of relationship that I've said. That relationship is more of what we now would discuss in the last topic in Form 4, that is support and movement, is more of what I usually describe as the skeleton. You must have the skeleton, and then the skeleton is what you'll feed onto the muscle, so that the muscle, once you feed it onto it, the little organism can be able to now move. So that skeleton entails you understanding the topics and how they are related. So are you able to tell that story? Because if you can't tell the story, then it would be very difficult for you to answer the questions when they come, because a number of those questions, if you look at the past KCC papers, they test that interrelationship that we see amongst the topics. Now, I started by saying that in our meeting, we agreed we are supposed to to continue with the topic support and movement. Now, this topic, like I've said, in many times, a number of students will look at it as a complicated, but it's not at all. It is, you must begin by breaking it down into components. The first component that you will need to understand is, why do we need support? What is the necessity for support and movement in animals and both in plants? Now, we are saying before you can move, and again in Form 1, we gave reasons why we have to move. We move for search of food, to search for a mate, etc. And therefore, we are saying, or we are all agreeing, that movement is a very critical component of a living organism. So before you move, we are saying you need a support framework. This support framework, for example, in us, as mammals, it is the skeleton. Why do we need it? That is why I'm saying, can we go out to understand the necessity for support, that support framework? Why do we, for example, we are saying plants, for example, why do they need a support movement? A support framework. We are saying there are a number of organisms that live on plants. The plants are habitats for other organisms. You can have a look at, for example, birds. And a number of those are boreal organisms like birds, monkeys. We're talking about insects. A number of them use plants as their habitats, and as they do, they add an extra weight on these organisms. On this plant. The plant itself would carry a number of, you'd realize, for example, an avocado would bear a lot of fruits, and those fruits carry a lot of weight. So we want to picture a situation where this avocado plant didn't have a support framework. And of course, the support framework comprises of the support tissues that we will discuss later. And these include the sclerenchyma, the parenchyma, all those support tissues. They are there to enable the plant, for example, support the weight of living organisms that are found in that plant, and also to enable the plant carry its own weight. The plant, the biomass, the mass of the plant when it is flowering, for example, would increase. It would even increase further during fruiting stage when it has borne fruits. So we are saying that support framework is important to enable the plants resist the breakage that is coming as a result of its own weight, and two, as a result of the weight of other organisms that are found or that live or that walk or that perch on this particular plant. Number two, we are saying the plant would need a support framework, because if you picture, for example, a forest is made up of plants that have very huge canopies, and yet there are those that do not have a stem, for example, the herbaceous ones. You would realize that each of these plants are trying to compete to expose, for example, their leaves to trap as much light as possible for the process of photosynthesis. They are trying to expose their flowers for pollination. They are trying to also expose their fruits for and seeds for dispersal. So the support framework is important. For example, a leaf requires to have the veins so that they can expose the leaf to uh, trap as much light as possible or trap as much carbon dioxide as possible for the process of photosynthesis. So the support framework enables the plants to get exposed to to dispersal agents, pollination agents, and such. Then we are also saying the point I'm putting across is understand the reason why each of us, could be plants or animals, require support framework. And then we also need to understand that plants as such, if you remember when we were looking at the characteristic of movement in Form 1, we were distinguishing, or we were trying to give a distinction between this characteristic in animals and in plants. And we agreed that movement in animals is locomotory in nature. In other words, we said plants move about, but animals move about, but plants movement is localized. In other words, it is movement within a particular location. Plants do not move about. They can't change position from one point to another. Their movement is either through swaying, or like in plants, we talked about growth of the pollen tube down the style to enable fertilization, or we talk about tropic responses and such, or anastic responses. So we are saying uh, the plants lack that ability to locomote, and yet we are saying moving from one point to another for us in animals is very important, so that we can search for food, we can search for mates. So the next question is, how do plants compensate for their inability to move about? And you realize they have several mechanisms. For example, plants are capable of photosynthesizing. They're able to carry out photosynthesis, meaning they are capable of generating or making their own food. And since they make their own food, they don't require to move about to look for the same food. Unlike us who are autotrophic, therefore would require to move about to look for food that has already been synthesized. Then they have mechanisms of the dispersal. For example, we remember the pod in Form 3, fruit classification. The pod has the self-dispersal mechanism. That is the explosive mechanism. Inajipasua yenyewe, and in the process it disperses those seeds. Then they have other mechanisms such as the ability to attract pollinators. Those are all mechanisms that enable the plants to compensate for the inability to move, now that we have agreed that movement is important. Now from there, we would look at the support tissues in plants. Again, in Form 2, when we were looking at the topic transport, we looked at a number of those support tissues in plants. You remember parenchyma tissue, for example. You said, for example, in Form 1, the topic cell physiology, one of the roles of osmosis is, for example, support in herbaceous plants. And when we come to the explanation as to how osmosis offers support in herbaceous plants, you realize these parenchyma cells, they are packaging cells. They are the tissue that we find packaged on many of the parts of the plant. And once they take in water, once they absorb water through osmosis, the cells become turgid. In that turgid state, the plant therefore becomes erect. And in that erect state, that herbaceous plant, that plant that does not have a support framework, becomes supported. And then we looked at these support tissues, how they are distributed. You remember us distinguishing between, for example, the distribution of the xylem tissues in a dicot root, the distribution of the phloem tissues in a dicot stem, and those distinction, it's important. So in when we are talking about support tissues in plants, we're only asking you to remember what we covered under transport in plants in relation to the sclerenchyma, the parenchyma, the chorenchyma, the xylem, and the phloem tissues. Remember, the xylem is made up of the xylem vessels and the tracheids, and all of these, because they are made up of dead cells, they offer an extra form of support. So in this topic support in plants, you are meant to really look at how these there are about 5 tissues enable the plant to get supported so that it can carry out those functions we've talked about. So for the parenchyma cells or tissues, we have said their main form of support is only when they have taken in water. The cells draw water through osmosis, they become turgid, therefore providing mechanical support, especially to herbaceous plants. Then the chorenchyma cells, these ones, their main support comes as a result of deposition or thickening of the cellulose cells, especially around their edges. You would find that the major support tissue or the major support chemical in chorenchyma cells is the cellulose. This cellulose is a type of polysaccharide that makes these cells rigid, that makes these cells strong. Remember again, right from Form 1, again, the topic osmosis, cell physiology, we said plant cells do not burst when put in a hypotonic solution. The reason is because they contain a cell wall that is made up of cellulose, which makes it rigid, and therefore it cannot burst, unlike animal cells, which end up bursting when you subject them to hypertonic conditions. So I want you to pick out that the chorenchyma tissue enables support in plants mainly because it is thickened with the cellulose. That is the key thing in terms of chorenchyma as a support tissue in plants. 2, this chorenchyma, just like the parenchyma tissues, they provide support, mechanical support in leaves. They also provide mechanical support in herbaceous plants or young woody stems, young woody plants that like seedlings whose stems have not really developed, and therefore the parenchyma and the chorenchyma, because parenchyma because of turgidity as a result of absorption of water, and then chorenchyma as a result of the cellulose, which is thickened in different forms. You remember in the xylem we have the spiral thickening, there is the pitted, and all those. Then the third tissue is the sclerenchyma. Call it sclerenchyma. The pronunciation is not important. What is important is how you are able to write it. Now, this is the main support tissue in plants. And the major chemical that offers support in the sclerenchyma is the polysaccharide referred to as lignin. You remember, it's made up of the sclerenchyma is made up of dead cells, and these cells are thickened with lignin, making them hard or rigid so that they can offer mechanical support. That is support tissue number 3 in plants. Number 1, we've talked about the parenchyma, offer support as a result of rigidity. Number 2 is the chorenchyma, offer support as a result of thickening with cellulose. Number 3 is the sclerenchyma, over support as a result of lignification. Number 4, another support tissue in plants are the xylem tissues. The xylem tissue is made up of vessels and tracheids. These ones, besides the function of transport of mineral salts and water, which we looked at in Form 1 and in Form 2, the xylem vessels also offer mechanical support, and the reason is because they are also lignified, if you can remember. We said they are lignified. And therefore, the emphasis I'm putting is that understand those support tissues. There is other ways through which plants offer support. For example, these are really not tissues, but we talk about, for example, plants that have thorns. There are those plants, like there's this parasitic plant, the kiscuta. Hii inakuanga yellow. We've seen it on the flowers on our flower beds. Kanakuanga kako yellow hivyo. Ako kaplanta kananga mizizi. Kanakuanga na some projections that grow out of it. Then they are able to penetrate into the plant tissue, and then it absorbs. So these thorns are a form through which plants are capable of supporting themselves. Then we have this other variety of plants that have tendrils. Tendrils are shoots that have been modified to enable the plant attach itself. I'm trying to check and see if I can get a tendril here so that I'm able. I don't have a diagram here, but I think you would understand what I'm talking about. I would be able to get one if I so that maybe in our subsequent session, so I'm able to do demonstration. But I'm sure you are aware of what I'm talking about. Those systems that are able to twine, those that are able to coil around other plants or other solid materials, so that they can be able to get exposed to trap light and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and such. So the point here is uh, understand the support mechanism, the support tissues in plants, how those support tissues are distributed in the plant, both in the stem. You can see that diagram there showing a transverse section of a stem, a transpose, a dicot stem, and that one of a monocot stem, so that you are able to know. Ukipewa this diagram, it has been drawn. Would you be able to say it is a transverse section of a monocot stem, or a transverse section of a dicot stem, or a monocot stem, or a dicot stem? So once you look at the way they are distributed, then authoritatively you can argue and say this stem, this diagram, this photograph was obtained from a dicot stem. Like the year 2022, the candidates were brought as a slide. They were given a slide, and that is in paper 3, and they were supposed to identify the slide so that they can be able to classify that particular plant from which that slide was obtained. So what I'm saying is, look at those support tissues and how they provide support in plants. Then that is what I've outlined under ways through which plants get their mechanical support. And you would use the stems that are able to coil or twine. There are the hooks or tendrils. Then I've also talked about turgidity that is brought about by the parenchyma cells absorbing water. There is also the sclerenchyma, which is lignified. Then there is the parenchyma, which is made up of cellulose. So, my friends, I spared much of the time to give you a bigger picture of the syllabus as organized from Form 1 up to Form 2, up to Form 4. But I've spared a little of this lesson to introduce to you to support and movement, especially in plants. So I would want you to look at the support in plants in those 3 aspects. One, the necessity for a support framework. Why do we need support framework in plants? And 2, look at, now that plants do not move about, how do they compensate for their lack of ability to move about now that we have agreed movement is important? 3, support tissues. Which ones are they? From the parenchyma, chorenchyma, sclerenchyma, the xylem, and then ways in which herbaceous plants support themselves. That is through coiling, use of spines or spikes. Then there is also twining. Then there is a turgidity that is brought about by the parenchyma cells absorbing water. I've been talking for the last, I don't know how many minutes, and I've done very little of demonstrating because I needed you to get to understand that relationship, so that now in subsequent lessons we can now remain focused on this topic, support. And so I would maybe create time to take you through now support and movement in animals, or I would even request a colleague to do it, but I would want to ask that once we would be given that opportunity to do a presentation for a biology lesson again, we would find ourselves much organized. That is that for the day. But I also want you to notice that we have done this in form of a marathon because we did a meeting just the other day, 2 days ago. And then yesterday we were able to mobilize ourselves to ensure that uh, a number of you in your various classes have been notified so that they can be brought on board for purposes of these presentations. We are glad that you guys are up to task. I'm not able to know how many of us are present. I'm now trying to go down so that I can see if I can identify a few of us who are present in the meeting, so that niwasalimie. So those of us who are in the meeting, you can comment. You can comment because you guys logged into the meeting by use of your parents' gadgets, and so if I begin reading the names I'm seeing there, I would be talking about your parents. Maybe by writing your name in the comment section, I would be able to see uh, to see who is present or who was present in the meeting, so that